How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have a special guest, DeeDee White, and in our podcast interview, we got to talking about newborns and newborn photography. So let's get into it. So I'm here with DeeDee White, and thank you for being on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your photography. You've done weddings, you've done newborns, you've done just a whole array of different types of photography. How did you get into this?
So the first time I picked up a camera was when my son was born, and he's 11 now. So I got a DSLR for Christmas, and I started taking pictures of my kids. And then I started taking pictures of my sister's kids and then my cousin's kids. And then it just branched out from there. So I think I started mostly with children and families.
Okay.
And then, like you said, I've tried everything. And in 2017, last year, was when I really wanted to hone in on a specialty. So I tried weddings. I did a few weddings in 2016, and that was awesome. But then 2017 came around, and I wasn't feeling it. And then I tried to do, I went on a lot of different avenues just to see what worked. And one of my favorite online teachers, mentors, is Marie Forleo. And she says, go with what wants to grow. So that was like the motto that I had in my mind.
Okay.
And I just went from there. And then this year, at the end of 2017, I invested in a lot of newborn education and workshops. And so far, 2018 has been completely full of newborns. And I keep hearing it daily that this is my calling, that this is the path I'm supposed to be on. And so it feels good to finally have my specialty that I'm confident and comfortable with.
Yeah, and your newborn work is definitely really amazing stuff. I've dabbled myself with one newborn shoot, and I've got to say it's not easy. They're not an easy subject if you're uncomfortable, like me handling newborns. Even with my son, I was very just out of my realm. So
yeah, I hear that a lot. I think that's what I enjoy about the newborns, is because anybody could pick up a camera and take photos. But for newborn, it takes that extensive learning, and you have to it really is a specialty.
And with newborn photography, what would you say is like a prime age? Because for maternity photography, I know that photographing a mother to be, there's sort of like a I look pregnant and glowing, and then there's a get this baby out of me phase. So
definitely
with newborns, is there like a sweet spot?
There is. In the past, I would say between 5 and 14 days, but then I found with my third child, I did her photos at 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days.
Oh wow.
Mostly because when it's your own baby, it is way more challenging. So it got me to realize 5 days, I feel like that's a little too new. They're still adjusting. They're still getting used to this world. So now I say 7 to 14 days. Although I did have a couple hiccups this year, so I had some babies come in after 2 weeks. And it was a challenge because after that 2-week mark, that's when they're more awake and they want to explore, and they're really realizing that they're not in their mom's stomach anymore.
Oh yeah.
You know? So 7 to 14 days is definitely the sweet spot. I love 10 days. That is, I don't know what it is about the 10 days, but it must be like where they're almost hitting a growth spurt. So they sleep a lot. And watch, now I'm going to jinx myself for tomorrow's shoot, but
well, let's hope not. Let's knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Wow. And so how do you then prepare, I would say, for with headshots or any type of modeling setup? I would imagine, you know, you have like water bottles set out or maybe drinks, things like that. I mean, do you have baby bottles? I mean, how do you set up, how do you prepare for a newborn?
For newborns, I actually send a really detailed prep guide to the moms because it does take a lot of preparation on my part and the parents' part. Um, it is very hot in the studio because the babies need it to be very warm for them to be sleepy.
Hmm.
So my heater, I do warm up the studio before, and then I turn it off when they get there because I don't know if they're going to need to feed the baby or I kind of have to read the baby and see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, if I feel the slightest chill in the studio, I will turn the heater back on for a few minutes. So I do provide water and just to it gets hot in there.
Yeah.
So um, and nursing moms, we can have a snack. It's I like to prepare to prepare for service because I don't think that a photographer just takes photos and provides photos. It is way more than that. It is from the moment that they email you to the moment that you become friends after their session, after you deliver their product. And for me, that is more important than the photos. It's the service.
Oh yeah, I can definitely agree with that, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that is definitely something that sets you apart from a lot of other photographers. Is just that personal touch that you put with the the people that you work with. I refrain from saying customers because I mean we hired you for my wife and I's wedding, and
Mm-hmm.
it's more well because we knew each other from way back.
Yeah.
It is more of a friendship. It's more of like dealing with somebody that you know, and I'm sure with new mothers or even new clients whom, like you said, become friends after their shoot. It's
Yeah.
definitely that service that you're providing.
Definitely. And I think I become friends with the majority of my clients. There's, very minimal, like they move away and they're not big social media, but I keep in contact with all my clients on social media, even the people that, are visiting Pismo and they find me from a Google search and they come to vacation. I have a lot of out of town clients and they may not be return clients. It depends on how often they come back to visit the beach, but I still keep in contact with them via social media because it's so much more than that. And you want to trust your photographer. You want to know that it's just so much more personal than just snapping some photos.
Yeah, definitely. And so to get more onto your newborn photography, when it comes to you mentioned preparing the studio and just making it more of providing a service and catering to your guests. How is it then that you're ensuring that the baby is comfortable at all times? Because now, as the photographer, a lot of times this might be your very first time meeting this newborn. How do you then? Well, I guess as a mother, you might have just that maternal instinct, but for anybody who might be new to it, I mean, what goes through your mind?
So I actually have a whole thing that I do before a photo shoot with a newborn. I have a lot of product that I use. I diffuse a gentle baby or peace and calming essential oil. So the whole of the studio is just very relaxing. And you've been in my studio, so you see how bright it is with the natural light because I
Yes.
don't use studio lighting. And so I feel like the brightness, you really have to focus on the calm vibe because of the brightness. It has to balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I use a calming mist spray from a local gal that makes them. It's a flower essence and essential oil blend. And I spray it in the room, spray it on my backdrop, spray it on the props that I'm going to use, spray it on myself because I do hold the baby a lot. And um, and then I diffuse the oil and I have music playing because you don't want it completely quiet because most homes aren't completely quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to create an environment that's not the baby's not going to be where am I.
Yeah.
And then I definitely do meditate. I do a grounding meditation before each session because I don't want to be frazzled because the baby can pick up on my energy. So
And that's
all
very
those little
true.
things, yeah. So it's so important. I'm such an energetic person. I have to really get into my zone for a
Yeah.
newborn session, compared to when you're out doing a family shoot and you're trying to make little kids laugh and you have to be so outgoing.
Oh yeah.
A newborn is like a complete opposite.
Yeah, I like that. How you're sort of setting the stage both
Hmm.
audibly with the sounds and with the senses, with the smells and everything like that. Because
Yeah,
as newborns, babies are all about that. They're all about just the sensory experience because not everything is
exactly.
visual just yet.
Hmm.
Well, that's definitely really cool. And when it comes to posing, I mean, handling a newborn, I mean, some of these shots that you get, and I'll provide a link in the description to your Instagram. They're just, I don't know how photographers do it and how you do it because I've seen like the memes where this is what you're going for and then this is how it really came out.
A
My
Pinterest
newborn
fail.
photos were like, this is how they came out. I mean, they were not. So
It definitely is a challenge.
yeah, and that's what I was asking is just how do you then pose the newborn and not disturb them and sort of get them in those capture those moments.
It is all about your workflow because it's funny because once I learned all of this through the education programs that I did, I was laughing at myself like, how did I ever get through a newborn session before this? Because I had no idea flow. And so now what I do is you'll see in a lot of my behind the scenes, I like to post that kind of stuff on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
so people can see that how I am gentle with a baby and just get a feeling of what it's like to be in the studio. Always swaddle first. It gets the baby real comfortable and into that deep sleep. And then I move next in the next pose. And so it is very minimal movement for the baby because you don't want to overstimulate. Children can get overstimulated so easily. And
Mm-hmm.
so handling a newborn, constantly moving them and posing them and changing them a lot, and that can make the photo shoot go a complete different direction. So it really is it even though the poses are very different looking, it's very minimal movement.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. Because moving a baby too much, a newborn, when my son was a newborn, just everything was like sort of wanting to make him feel as if he's floating on a cloud. We didn't want to wake him up. We didn't want to
Hmm.
disturb him from his sleep.
Exactly.
That's really awesome. And I guess when it comes to because you did mention you shoot in natural light, which I am a natural light photographer and I'm all for that. I know people that love using studio lights or love using flash. I think for me, it gets a little too technical. Um,
Hmm.
but shooting in natural light, um, how does working with that kind of dictate your workflow? I guess.
Well, so far, we've had great weather. I've done one photo shoot in my studio where it was a downpour storm last winter. Um, and I was pretty nervous about it, but all I did was just change my camera settings a little bit, bump up ISO a tad, and no one would even know. So when I do a studio shoot for the newborns, I book them all at 11 a.m. so that then I know the lighting, I know where the sun's going to be, and it's the best lighting in the studio at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really worked out very well. Although I am tempted to learn lighting, but that'll be on my next
On your next
thing.
venture.
My yes, because it is. It is serious. It's like just I can't even wrap my mind around lighting right now.
I'd seen a couple videos, and there's things like this is your main light. Here's your off to the side camera left light, and here's your
Uh-huh.
hair light, and then here's your backdrop light. And
Yeah, yeah.
for
It is.
me, I
It's
prefer the sun.
me too. And you know what's funny? As a photographer, I know sun is at all times of I'll know like, okay, this location's great during, January through March because the sun is over here. And my husband makes fun of me because he's like, how do you pay attention to that? I'm like, you have to know that. Like, I'm a natural, I have to know where the light is at all times.
Yeah. And well, being that you're a local and that you're familiar with your surroundings, I'm pretty sure you know exactly where the sun is at all times, like you mentioned. For me, when I first started, I actually had to download an app. I think it was the solar calendar or the sun app that would tell me
Oh,
the sunrise location and the sunset location.
oh, see, I'm not a big app person, but that's awesome.
Yeah,
I kind of just make notes in my mind. April, the sun's over here. October.
yeah, and I think that's definitely something that comes with a lot of experience. And you've mentioned you've been doing this for quite some time. So
Mhm.
for me, I need the help.
That's cool that they have that though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually did take a break for a few years. Put my camera down, had some life changes, and I did some management positions, and it was a very big change. And then once I started picking my camera back up, I was like, this is like therapeutic to me. I
Hmm.
love it. But it's funny because I had always worked in restaurants, and so for a few years I was a restaurant manager, and that actually helped me to be a better business owner because I had to do budgets, I had to do inventory, I had to do financial calls with the corporation. So um, my business side of photography by DeeDee is based around all of that knowledge that I gained from working in a restaurant, in a corporate restaurant.
Oh, nice.
So my tax lady, she loves my spreadsheets because I'm so thorough with all of my um, accounting.
And that's definitely something I think that um, plays a major role, especially as a photographer, because you're trying to capture those moments for people that they want to
Mm-hmm.
hold on to for years. They're going to hand these photos down, they're going to stay with their families, and having either a business background working in the food industry in management positions, or just being an outgoing person who is personable and can talk to strangers, pretty much carry a conversation. I think those are very important attributes to have, whether you coming into photography with only one of them, or like yourself, I've always known you to be very energetic. So to have sort of two of them, it's like an even better thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to the editing of newborn photography, is not to like delve too much into your workflow, but um sharpening, do we not do it with newborns? I mean, do we want them to remain sort of soft
No,
skin?
yes. So it's actually pretty tricky because you have to get the sharpness in camera. So it's really about your back button focusing and your camera settings because then when you come into Lightroom and Photoshop, I use both of them. I start in Lightroom and then I move over to Photoshop.
Oh yeah, I've done that a
And
few times myself too.
yeah, I do it. I don't do it a lot with families unless I need to take out some background stuff.
Hmm.
But newborns is start in Lightroom, and I do presets for my newborns, and then I open them up into Photoshop, and you can really you can really it's called separation frequency, and you keep the texture so that it stays nice and sharp,
Hmm.
but then you have to smooth the skin at the same time. So it's a I find as long as you have that sharpness in camera, it really makes a difference because then you can work on just smoothing out their, newborns have little baby acne and their skin's peely and
Hmm.
some, it's birth is traumatic, even cesarean or however your baby is brought into this world. So there can be a lot of bruising and just marks.
Hmm. Yeah, when my son was first born, he had a bruise on his foot when he was when the doctors um pulled him out.
Uh
And
huh.
so one of the first photos that I posted, to my Instagram was actually black and white, so that people wouldn't see, oh,
Oh,
his poor
yeah.
little purple foot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely, I can see that that type of workflow working for you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Starting in Lightroom and using your presets and then taking it over to Photoshop, because Photoshop is just such a powerful tool when it comes to removing things from the background and just using like a clone stamping tool or anything like that, or
Mm-hmm.
spot healing.
Yeah. I first started with Photoshop and I never even knew about Lightroom. I don't even know if Lightroom was a thing yet.
I
And
think it came like years later, because Photoshop, it started, and then I think they also had I forget what it's called, but it's a way to sort of batch edit with Photoshop, kind of like you can do
yes.
with Lightroom, but Lightroom's more of like a catalog of this is where all the photos are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, so I started with Photoshop, and then when my friend introduced me to Lightroom, I was like, whoa, no way, no thank you. I'm good with my Photoshop. But having to open up individual photos in Photoshop was driving me nuts. And then I took a couple classes at Hancock, the local college, and we learned through Lightroom. And so that was where I really got to know Lightroom a lot better. And then I switched over to Lightroom. And then I recently just got the Adobe Creative, the whole thing where you have all of the programs.
Oh,
So now
nice.
that's why I'm using the Photoshop, because back when I first started, we didn't have that ability. You had to purchase them individually and it was so expensive.
Yes.
Now it's nice to pay the monthly subscription.
And they've been doing the updates pretty consistently, which I remember when they first switched over to offering the Creative Cloud. People were worried that, oh, are you even going to update this software anymore now that you're just getting money every month?
Oh, yeah.
But it definitely, I
Yeah,
think it
it
levels the
updates.
playing field for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people who want to get into photography. It doesn't make that leap so expensive, because not only is there camera equipment, but then editing software as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then um, with newborn photography and using Lightroom, I know that you mentioned Lightroom with family portraits, and for me, taking family portraits or even weddings, you sometimes end up with a lot of photos. How many photos would you say you end up with newborns, or is a studio session you sort of get that pose and you capture it within like two, maybe five shots?
With newborns, I I probably import about 200 photos from a session, and it's anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. So, depending how easy the baby is or how many times you have to feed or soothe the baby,
Mm-hmm.
it can go up to 3 hours. But I find that I always have about 200 photos. Um, I don't know why, but I take like 4 photos of each at a time instead of like four of the same photos, because I want to see. I don't know why I do it, but I've always done that. So I want to see which one is the sharpest. And so I always have four of each
Oh
every
yeah,
time I take a photo.
I'm the same way. Like
Do you do that? Okay.
I, I set my camera to well, I'm currently using a D500 Nikon, and I set it to continuous low because continuous high is just insane. It's insanely
Oh.
fast. So
Mm-hmm.
I use continuous low, and I'll usually snap 3 images in rapid succession. And
Okay.
with this camera, the autofocus has been amazing. Like my keeps to rejects ratio is like way better than it was with my other camera. I was sort of like a really low, like 65% would be keeps, and the rest I had to reject because it just didn't hit the focus.
Yeah.
And
And
that's, oh, go ahead.
I try to get my photos. Sorry, I try to get my photos as close to perfect, not so much editing. Like I know some people shoot real dark or real bright. I
Mm-hmm.
try to get it. My photos are very bright and airy, so I try to shoot exactly how I want them to look, and then I just enhance them, and then with newborns, obviously, there's a lot more editing that goes into it. But I remember when I first started out, I had no idea what I was really doing, to be honest. I'm a self-taught photographer, besides the couple college classes I which was like 3 years into me taking photos.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to do so much because they were either so dark or just for whatever reason, you know. And so now that's what I try to do, is get them really clear in the camera so that I don't have to sit there and do a ton of editing.
And so you mentioned getting it right in camera, and I couldn't agree with that anymore. I know that when I first started out, I just tried to focus on keeping the rule of thirds in the beginning, because a lot of my edits, I found I'm cropping way too much, and I tried to get the framing of my photo right the first time. And then after that, I noticed, well, hey, some of my photos, they aren't as sharp as I would have wanted them to be. So then I started thinking about making sure I get the focus, or making sure I get the sharp image. And now that you mentioned lighting, that's actually where I am at right now, is trying to ensure that my lighting is the same, because with weddings or any type of photos that you have more than 100, I mean, going through and adjusting exposure is not the funnest thing to do.
Exactly. And when you have like a wedding and you have hundreds and hundreds of pictures, the last thing you want to do is have to sit there and do so much editing to those, you know?
Yes. And because, well, I think it's safe to say we both shoot manual.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think that it's really nice that being in a studio setting, you're able to, I guess, sort of lock in your settings and then you're good, correct? Or
Yeah.
with the natural lighting, does it kind of, well, I mean, you mentioned you shoot at 11, so the light kind of stays consistent around that time, unless there's a rogue cloud that comes over past.
You know, yes, because when it was about 2 weeks ago, when it was, I think we had a little bit of rain, and every single pose, even during one pose, you know, I was having to go up, scroll back down, scroll back up, because as the clouds were passing, and it was black clouds, so it made a huge difference. I'm like, okay, this is really funny, because usually, yeah, I can dial into my settings. I know exactly where I need my camera, and then I, you know, have to tweak it a little bit because every baby is different. You know, if I have an African American family, or if I have a baby that is very light skinned, all that affects your settings. You know, you have to constantly be changing your settings. So shooting on manual, you really have to know what you're doing for that, because you have to be able to change your settings as, you know, the clouds pass by.
Yes. And do we talk shooting raw versus JPEG, or do you shoot raw?
I shoot completely raw. I actually don't even do JPEGs in my camera.
Okay. Yeah, I shoot raw as well.
I it leaves way more room on your memory card, and it gives you that free range, you know, to be able to edit way better than this is how I was trying to explain it to my husband. Shooting in raw versus JPEG. A raw is like wet concrete that you can shape and do what you need to do to it.
Mm-hmm.
JPEG is like the hardened concrete that you're like, okay, what can we do to it?
Yes.
You know, you're very limited with it.
Yes, because even exposures, I've noticed, like I've shot both a raw and a JPEG backup. That if you don't get it right, the highlights, some of these cameras, these higher end cameras, they have a wide not depth of field, but a wide gamut or range of information that they can store in some of those highlights that you thought might have been just totally burnt out, or even some of the shadows that you thought are just pitch black. There's still information in there, but when it's a JPEG, it's gone. So if that rogue cloud comes over, and like for all of us, the couple might not have that big of an opinion on it. But for us in Lightroom, I know that sometimes it's like, this was the shot. This was the
Mm-hmm.
one that I wanted. And if it's in JPEG and you can't save it, you're always just going to have that feeling. Though the
Mm-hmm.
clients may be happy with their photos, you'll have that feeling like, that was the one though, and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
give it to you.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't remember when I switched to RAW. Um, my Canada, what is RAW? Way back when, before I'd ever been paid for a photo shoot.
Mm-hmm.
But I would shoot in just JPEG, and so I think back to my edits, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? I actually pulled up. I found an old hard drive, and so I have a lot of my work from before I was actually a business, and the edits just make me laugh. I'm like, oh, how I'm so glad that I wasn't charging these people for these photos. It's like super saturated, super contrast. It was just like up everything, up
Yeah.
all the sliders.
And that's what's cool about RAW too, because sometimes I've gone back to older pictures, sort of like with more experience behind me, and I'll sort of dive in there and see like, oh, this is what I was doing, and then I'll kind of tweak them to my style now, and I'll compare the before and after and see like,
Hmm.
wow, I've definitely come a ways here.
Yeah. I finally found my style of edits. I never really understood that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so even, I mean, just going back to when my youngest was a newborn, and I have re-edited her photos before I printed them because I'm like, oh, I don't like that editing style. Now I've found my consistent, like I said, it's real bright and airy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once you find your style, it really makes a big difference
Oh,
so that
I
you have
can
that
believe that for
consistency.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because even when going through like on Instagram and just scrolling through, it's like I can pick out your photos just looking at them before I even open, like when it's on the eyeglass, just the search.
Yeah,
And I'll see, oh, there's a newborn picture, and I can just tell because your style is your signature.
I love that. Thank you. That's awesome. That's what I was going for.
I can't say that I
And
found my own style yet. I bounce back and forth between videos and photos so often that I think the two
oh
are
yeah,
starting to become blurred.
uh-huh. That would be challenging. And then you'll notice in my newborn photos that I have a very simple style. I love the simplicity. I have a very simple style. I don't use a lot of props. I used to do that when I first started doing newborns,
Hmm.
and I I've gotten away from that because I like the focus to be on the baby. And so my vision is clean, crisp, and simple. And then my studio, you've seen my studio, and it's all white. So I
Hmm.
love like the bright white, clean look. And that's really what I'm going for. So I love that you can recognize my photos in the feeds on Instagram. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that too, how you mentioned having a white studio, it's very welcoming as soon as you walk in. I mean, I'm not a newborn, but when I walked in, it felt very inviting. And definitely having that cleaner look. I mean, I've seen a lot of pictures with that are sort of proppy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of distracting. I understand there's parents out there that maybe want their baby holding a football or on a
Mm,
football, but at the end of the day,
yeah.
I'm a big fan of it's it's our baby's pictures. Like this is them.
Yeah. Well, and then you don't want to, I think when I'm doing photos, even family photos and everything, something I always ask the families is, what color is your home decorated in? Because if your home is very pastel and light colors,
Hmm.
you don't want to wear all red and bright colors to your photo shoot because think about how those photos are going to look when they're hanging on your walls. That's
Yeah.
my goal because it's not just about the social media posting a digital image. A lot of people will get prints and canvases and all of that. And So that's what I keep in mind. That's when I did my engagement photo shoot with a local photographer.
Mm-hmm.
I planned our family's outfits around how our home is decorated. That's why we did them at the beach, because I have a beach theme home. And so with the newborns, all those props are great, but what is that going to look like hanging up on your wall forever and for generations
Yes.
being passed down? Like styles change, you know, all that kind of stuff is always changing. And so when I have a baby just on a basic white backdrop with a wrap or a cute little headband,
Mm-hmm.
it's very minimal because I think generations. I don't think right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I had never thought of that sort of approach. I guess I'm more in the digital era. I've done a
Mm-hmm.
few prints myself, just for my own, to hang pictures on the wall. But I've never really thought about that. Like, think about your living room or think about your space, and
Mm-hmm.
um, the clothes or the look should complement that, because I mean, it is a piece of artwork. It is a piece that should contribute to the space.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, definitely a very awesome piece of information right there. Again, I'm speaking with DeeDee White. I want to thank you for being on my podcast and talking to me today about newborn photography and providing these awesome little tips.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. Well, I hope to have you on again, and thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.